Dr. Chris Bessent. I've been a holistic veterinarian for over 30 years, and I am certified in veterinary chiropractic, veterinary acupuncture, Chinese herbology, and also have degrees in holistic medicine, including oriental medicine and herbology for humans. So welcome to From Disease to Health, an integrated veterinary approach. Every episode, I host seasoned veterinarians with expertise in integrative practices to learn more about their approaches in treating disease and sick animals through the power of nutrition. Today, we have the very special guest joining me, Dr. Odette Suter. Dr. Suter is an incredible holistic veterinarian, international best-selling author, a lecturer who has made it her life goal to search for the root causes of disease and apply holistic and functional medicine to her practice. She specializes in Chinese medicine, chiropractic care, neurology, applied kinesiology, and nutrition. She owns the Peak Animal Health Center, where she combines treatment and education of clients to help them create longevity for their animals. I am so excited to welcome you, Dr. Suter. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of this fabulous conversation. And today we're going to be talking about the microbiome. I don't hear Dr. Suter. Do you guys? Few technical difficulties. Let's see if we can get this worked out. Dr. Suter and I have known each other for, 5 or 6 years now. I think we met originally at the Middle West Food Summit in Chicago. And I think that was when you were really introducing your book to the world. And that was such an exciting time. You came and you had all your books and you signed for everybody. And it was really, really fabulous. And since then, you've really become well known as an integrative veterinarian and have been so gracious to be able to educate your clients and educate other veterinarians as well into holistic medicine. So I'm thrilled that you're able to be here today. Let's see if we can hear you speak.
Yeah, hi. I hope so.
We got you.
I had to go into the settings. Somehow it wasn't picking up on my microphone, which is weird because before we were talking already. So anyways, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was such a pleasure, to meet you in person way back when. Yeah, we had such great conversations and I'm so happy that I get to see you at the upcoming conference next week. So.
Sounds great. Tell us about your thoughts on the microbiome, because I think it's something that's so huge that we all know bits and pieces about, but it's so massive. So
yeah, well, first off, you can't talk about the microbiome without having the right attire.
I hate to say that means you're a shithead, but
you're not the first one. You're not the first one. Except sometimes people are just a little less forward. But yeah, I mean, you got to make it fun because, poop is disgusting. So many people are asking, why is my dog eating poop? Why is my dog eating cat poop? And it's disgusting. How can I make them stop? And I always say, well, why would you make them stop?
Yeah.
So anyways, the microbiome is so critically important for the body in general. And just for those of you guys who don't know what the microbiome is, it's basically a community of microbes that lives in around the body. And we have a microbiome of the skin, we have a microbiome of the gut, obviously the lungs, the bladder, the ears, the eyes, the mouth, and different areas, even in the mouth, for example, have different microbes, depending on where in the mouth it is. And same thing in the gastrointestinal tract as well. depending on whether it's the stomach or the the small intestine, the large intestine. We have different communities of microbes, and these microbes are bacteria, viruses, protozoa, algae, fungi, bacteriophages, obviously parasites as well, the larger ones, and they're all kind of part of this community. And overall, we have about 100 trillion different microbes in the gastrointestinal tract itself. And then, from a cell number perspective, they outnumber the cells of the body by a number of 10, by a factor of 10. So we have 10 times more microbes than there are cells of the body. And from a genetic perspective, they outnumber the body by a factor of 150. So there's 150 times more genetic code, or DNA available from the microbes than from the body itself. So I always ask people, well, who's running the show here?
Yeah,
right?
that's a great point.
It's the microbes. And, if we take it even a little bit further, the microbes code for 90% of all metabolic processes in the body.
Wow.
So basically, without microbes, we are nothing, and our animals are nothing. So we need all of these microbes. And, to add even more numbers, if we have 200,000 microbes per immune cell.
Wow.
So they have such a huge impact on the immune system. They make all these metabolic compounds. They make serotonin, which, we have an epidemic of anxiety these days, it seems like, with our animals. Well, serotonin is a precursor, for melatonin, and it helps to calm. It's a calming neurotransmitter. And so if we have an imbalance in the gastrointestinal tract from the microbial perspective, then we don't have enough of that serotonin production, which then affects the brain, and the animals can't calm themselves down, basically. Microbes also make vitamins. They make taurine. One big thing that, when this whole DCM, the dilated cardiomyopathy in dogs was kind of publicized as being an issue with grain-free diets, they forgot to include that, well, what's going on with the microbiome? Why are these animals not producing enough taurine themselves? Because it's not an essential amino acid. It's one that the body can, make itself, or the microbiome can make itself, I should say.
Right. That combination of cysteine and methionine, the other amino acids.
Yeah. So in any case, without microbes, we just don't live. And these days we are so into killing everything. It's like microbes are bad. We're disinfecting everything. We're spraying everything. It's like we have a war on microbes, a war on everything, instead of, considering that, for one, they were here long before we were. They helped with the evolution of things to make us multicellular organisms. We have microbes or microbial type structures in every cell that we call mitochondria. Those are like really ancient microbes that are creating energy, that are producing energy in our cells. And if we don't have enough of these, then, our animals develop cancer because the cells don't make enough energy. And a cell that doesn't make enough energy turns into a malfunctioning cell, and then the DNA kind of produces God knows what. And it just turns into a cell that's not acting right, basically.
It is amazing. It's so the microbiome and microbials of the world are so immense, and you really put the words to it that it's such a vital part of our world, but yet we tend to villainize them. Like, I've always felt like at some point in time, we're going to realize there's good viruses in the world, that all viruses aren't bad, that there might be good ones out there that are necessary for our health. Just like years ago, we didn't realize that they're good bacteria that are helping us, and that all bacteria are not necessarily bad.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, certainly there are a lot of viruses. There are actually, as far as the numbers go, there are 5 times more viruses in the biome than bacteria.
Wow.
As far as the numbers go, and species-wise, from the microbiome perspective, we have about 500 different species of microbes and about 1,000 different subspecies. So we have a ton of species, and that's why, when we look at probiotics, for example, we have maybe 10 if you're lucky. If you have
Right.
a probiotic that has a little bit more species in it, and it's like 10 versus 500 to 1,000. That's like,
So tell me, what do you feel is the primary reason why we have such an imbalance of our microbiome in our
probably
pets?
glyphosate would probably be one of the top.
I
Um,
agree. Yeah,
because it's an
there's
antibiotic.
not a day that goes by that I don't think about glyphosate and how crazy it is that we just spray our food with it and then
Yeah.
take it to market and feed it to our children. And for the viewers that don't know, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. And that not only is Roundup used in your lawn care or bringing down weeds around your yard, but it's also used in agriculture to spray crops so that they all mature at the same time period. So oats and wheat and barley and all of these macadamia, all these amazing um, foods that we've used for years. Now they spray it with glyphosate, and then 7 days later, they can harvest the whole field at once rather than waiting until it naturally matures. The downfall is that glyphosate now concentrates in the grains of that crop. Then we harvest it, and then we put it in our bread, and we put it in our food, and we feed it to our children, and we feed it to our pets, and it's crazy. So glyphosate would be your number one.
Yeah, I mean, glyphosate they have found in 75% of all air and rain samples. And since it
Wow.
rains and there's air everywhere, it's basically everywhere. And 70%
Right.
of American household drinking waters have contained glyphosate. And that's why it's so important to provide the animals with clean water. So using filters that will filter out glyphosate is extremely important. And rinsing the paws after you've been outside. And I've never really been a huge fan of doing a lot of washing of dogs, but given that all that's going on, probably washing them once in a greater while, a little more frequently, is probably helpful to get some of these toxins off, because all they do is, especially cats, they lick themselves. I mean,
Right.
you might be having a little bit of challenges if you're trying to bathe a cat, but at least make them off with a cloth of water. Don't. I'm not a big fan of adding more chemicals to an animal, even if it's natural. So
Right.
all these white, those types of things. I mean, there's still things that would have to be processed. So I'm a big fan of just water.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, things like that can help decrease it.
And I think it's the food that we're feeding as well. So 93% of our pets are receiving kibble
Mm.
as a diet. And um, if we're not feeding clean proteins to them, if we're not feeding clean food to them, what's happening is it's
Mhm.
concentrating within their body, but it's also directly affecting the microbial cultures of their entire body. So their mouth, their skin, their gut, the incidence of sensitivity in the gut is just crazy on dogs. I mean, pet parents, there's not a day that goes by that I don't hear from a pet parent, and I'm sure the same is for you, that their dog is sensitive to this and that, and sensitive to meat, which is crazy for a carnivore.
Right, right.
So
Yeah,
what's your so what's your go-to kit? Because I think that we're both in this integrative veterinary practices because we want to help pets and we want to have the pet parent be proactive in helping their pet and understanding and not waiting until there's a problem, but starting to be proactive about their care. What's your go-to kit for improving the microbiome? I want to know.
Yeah. So with the microbiome, I've actually, in the past few months, I've decided to do testing on every animal, basically, and on a yearly basis at least, because I've had so many animals now where people just wanted to know what the microbiome was like in their perfectly healthy animal, and it was awful. Like significant
Wow.
imbalances. I currently have one little, dog, fluffy thing. He doesn't have diarrhea or any vomiting or anything like that, but 50% of his microbial flora is from the Escherichia shigella group, which is a more pathogenic sort of microbe, and the good ones are not even there. I'm like, okay, we
Wow.
need to do something about that. So just because an animal doesn't show any signs of digestive issues does not mean that their microbiome is going to be healthy and balanced. And again, because it rains on everybody, there's glyphosate everywhere, there are pesticides, other types of pesticides everywhere. Most animals have been on antibiotics at one point or another. Metronidazole basically decimates, the microbiome. And so that's kind of my go-to is to test and see where they're at so that I have a bit of an idea of what the imbalance is like. Because for certain imbalances, we have to add a little bit of something else to help decrease the numbers, because the fecal transplant by itself is not quite enough. Um, so definitely doing that, and it's very easy. We have Animal Biome, the company, who anybody can order a kit and send in a little bit of poop and have that tested. You don't need your vet for that, although I do highly recommend that you involve your vet in it, because I think a big issue that we're dealing with is that people are getting more educated than their vets, and we need to kind of change that and bring more awareness to it. Because, for example, in a lot of the dogs that have IBD, it's nobody is testing the microbiome. I'm like,
Yes.
what in the world is wrong here?
You're
I mean,
right.
microbiome is out there, the research is out there, and veterinarians are catching up on it. But if you have an animal that has a poor microbiome and maybe you tested it yourself, make sure you send the report to your vet and have a discussion with them so that they can learn about it as well. Because you, as the consumers or the pet parents, guardians, whatever you guys call yourselves,
Pet
you're the
parents.
ones, yeah, you guys are the ones that are making a difference. You're the ones who are pushing veterinarians to educate themselves more. It's not going to come from the veterinary world. If you decide you want to know what's going on in your guts, in your animal's gut, you got to go, tell your vets and educate them.
I got a
Because,
great question from Stephanie Schultz, which fits in exactly on what you're speaking about.
mhm.
Stephanie asks, do you know how long it takes to fix the gut biome after, let's say, one round of antibiotics, or does it really depend on the age and the situation of the animal?
It probably doesn't necessarily depend on the age, but certainly the animal's makeup. What was the microbiome like before you even, gave antibiotics? How well is it recovering afterwards? How quickly is it recovering afterwards? What did it? Because the microbiome gets established when they're born, when they're going through the vaginal canal, and mom's microbes in the environment and the environmental microbes in that area. That's how it gets established. So if mom already had a poor microbiome, then the puppy will also have a deficient microbiome as a result of that. So it very much depends on where they started, and so it depends. And then there's also other components that play a role with the microbiome, which is hormones. I see a lot of dogs that have deficient adrenal hormones, and those tend to also hold on to a good microbiome less easily and may need more fecal transplants more frequently than others. And I've also noticed a huge decrease in the effectiveness of microbial transplant, fecal transplants. I started probably about 6 years ago, and I had my own donor dog. I mean, he wasn't mine, but I had a donor dog who was at the time about 12 years old. He had never been sick in his life, and his microbiome was like,
Perfect.
really amazing. And unfortunately, he passed away. And since then, I've been ordering poop, and from Dr. Margot Roman, because she's kind of the one who's basically put poop on the map again.
Margot is not going to be happy about this. I was calling her the poop queen.
Yeah, she totally deserves that title.
So for Stephanie's question, you would say that it depends on her dog, but that you would recommend testing to see where he's at and then how she can help.
Yeah, because
I also have another question from John, and he says, what would healthy dog poop look like?
Well, a healthy dog poop would be firm. You can pick it up. It doesn't stink. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And then I have
it has a lot of undigested things in it too, because that can also be a sign of unhealth or poor digestion. Obviously, if you're feeding chunks of carrots, they're going to come out the same way because they don't have the enzymes to break it down, and their GI tract is much shorter. So, yeah.
Trish also has a question which kind of goes into the fecal transplant. What do you suggest to help fix a gut besides a fecal transplant?
I like Ion Gut, which is from Intelligence of Nature. It's basically a soil-based compound that helps with redox signaling, which what that is. I'm not going to go try to explain that because I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around that. But basically what it does is it helps to prevent absorption of and damage from glyphosate in part. It helps to tighten the junctions between the cells of the lining of the intestinal tract, because the lining of the intestinal tract is just one layer of cells, so it's very thin. And a lot of these compounds like glyphosate, gluten, all types of different drugs, etc., they can basically damage that lining where then the cells spread apart and then you have little holes. We call that leaky gut. So what that Ion Gut helps to do is it helps to tighten these junctions between the cells, but not just the GI tract, also the kidneys and other linings of the body. So, and it also provides, because it's a molecule that helps with communication. It helps communication between these microbes in the gastrointestinal tract, but also the communication of the microbes with the cells, because one of the big things that cause disease is basically breakdown of communication. Just like any company, if you have breakdown of communication within a company or within your relationship with people, it's kind of turned to, shit, basically. So it helps with communication of things. It helps to restore that. Another thing that you can also do to help fix the microbiome is get rid of my electromagnetic radiation, or at least decrease it, because the EMFs that we are currently exposed to, they resonate. The frequency is very close to the frequency of the body and the microbes itself too. And so what that does is it causes confusion, which then again leads to communication failure. Basically, for example, with fungi, with mold, they have found that in the presence of EMFs, like Wi-Fi, for example, they will produce, and I can't remember the exact number, but a huge amount more toxins, and the toxins are much more toxic. So, so we need to remove a lot of things. Trying to, with fixing the microbiome. And
for me, a really big thing is feeding fresh food.
Right.
Eating real food.
Obviously.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like an obvious, but in reality, 93% of pet owners feed kibble. That's
Yeah.
oftentimes made, the majority of it is made with rendered meat meals. So we're feeding our pets garbage essentially, and expecting that their microbiome is going to be in good order, expecting that their health is going to be in good order, that um, are we giving them the nutrients that they need to have health, not only for them but for the microbiome as well. So to me, a really big deal is the food that we feed on a daily basis. And it kind of brings up another topic of this idea of completely sterile food. And should we be having live food, fresh food that comes from our garden, that has the soil-based probiotics or the soil-based bacteria in it? When you lived on a farm, you grew up and you ate dirt.
Right, exactly.
Dogs eat dirt. And is there some benefits to those sort of things versus the idea of completely shelf-stable, zero tolerance for any bacteria in our food? And that kind of goes back to the fresh food movement of adding fresh foods to our diets as well as to our pets.
Yeah.
We have another question from Stephanie. Do you have any advice for retailers who are super passionate about helping their customers?
Well, educate, people as far as what they're actually getting in the bag, because I know, if we go back to kibble, for example, a lot of people think that, well, grain-free is going to be healthier than the non-grain-free. But in some of these studies that they've done around glyphosate, to get back to that, is that glyphosate was actually much higher in grain-free food than in, other junk.
I agree. 100%. To me personally, I feel like that was the root of this DCM in grain-free dogs, is that the amount of glyphosate in those, because we went from carbohydrates from grains to carbohydrates from legumes, and legumes are the crop that glyphosate is sprayed on so that they all mature at the same time.
Right.
Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm as passionate about this as you are, and that.
Yeah. No, and plus, I mean, there's really, just to kind of go back to DCM, there's no actual proof that the food is causing it, and plus, there's been 500 some DCM cases, whereas we have a gazillion dogs and cats and humans with cancer. I mean, we're focusing in the wrong place, when it comes to that. That was just kind of like a little side note, but yeah, definitely educating them on food, and and telling people you cannot expect your dog to thrive or your cat to thrive on something that the body's physiology is not made to process. I mean, carbohydrates are sky high on these foods. And people always ask me, what's the healthiest kibble? I'm like, there is no such thing as a healthy kibble. It does not exist. And I'm definitely, there are dogs that have more challenges with different foods and such, but we have to get to the underlying cause of why do they have issues with these kinds of foods, and figure that out. So
I love your answer to Trish or to Stephanie about where do retailers come into this? And retailers are kind of the front line, right? They're the workers, they're the people talking to the pet parents every day, and they're the ones that can educate on microbiome and all of the amazing things you've talked about today. They're the ones that can educate more about it. They're the ones that are actually applying what we're recommending.
Yeah, they're really amazing.
Another great question from Michelle, and her question is, should we start supporting the microbiome in puppies?
Hi, Michelle. I know Michelle. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's part of the protocol. When I get a new puppy that comes to my practice, I start them on fecal capsules right away. Yeah. I just assume they have a poor microbiome just because we don't know what happened with mom. We don't know sometimes we know where they lived and everything, but just preventatively, I just do that. And, especially now that everybody, okay, so now we went from DCM and now it's everybody has parvo, you know, because
Oh,
Michigan has a parvo outbreak, whatever that means. I mean, I haven't really dove into it anyway. But you know, everything gets blown up and there's another fear mongering something or other that comes along. But in any case, with puppies, that's what I do is I put them on fecal capsules because I
okay.
want to supply them with a good microbiome, because what they found in some studies with humans is that if a human baby didn't grow up with a good microbiome, by the, you know, and had a good microbiome before they reach, you know, 5 years of age, they will never be able to develop a good brain function, and they can't catch up
Oh,
with that because the microbiome has such a huge impact on the brain development. So if they don't have a good microbiome while the brain is developing, they will not be able to kind of catch up on that later. And what do we see? A lot of behavior issues, not just in animals, but humans as well,
it
obviously.
is.
You know,
Yeah, it is
um,
fascinating. The
so
amount of research that is out there on the microbiome and all the aspects of it are amazing. So, you know, don't you remember the time when talking about leaky gut was like voodoo, and then
yeah,
people are like, oh, I don't know what that crazy woman is talking about. And now when you go to PubMed and put in microbiome, the amount of citations of fabulous peer-reviewed
mm,
research is astronomical.
yeah, it's you can't keep up anymore.
Right. There's
You
so much out
know?
there, which is amazing. I have
Mm.
another question from Janine, and
Mhm.
Janine is asking, is the raw food worth its price? There you go.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I
I
always
would
tell
agree as
people,
well.
yeah, I always tell people, if you don't invest in your animal, you're going to pay for it later at a much higher level, because not only is, you know, the price of sickness and trying to get them back to health higher than preventing disease, but the suffering of the animal needs to be taken into consideration, and then the suffering of the humans as well. Because you know, I do a lot of interviews with people to see where they're at in their journey and where it is that they want to go. And one of the you know, most common things that they say, my life sucks, you know, like they have such poor quality of life because their animal is sick.
Yes, I
And
agree.
obviously we care about the animals, we want them to be healthy, but if you don't invest, you're going to pay for it like in a much higher level.
You say it much more eloquently than I do. I say pay now or pay later.
Yeah, that's
If you either invest in good quality food in the beginning
Mhm.
or their poor health, eventually you're going to invest in more veterinary care and you know, cancer therapy and so many other things that slowly but surely are going to happen. And
Mhm.
for me, raw is fabulous, but it's more about the difference between feeding real food versus heavily processed food.
Mhm.
And so raw food naturally is real food. It's meats and organs and fresh fruits and vegetables, and it's real food versus heavily processed food. So,
Mhm.
Janine, I would say that it's worth the price to feed real food. So,
Mhm.
fresh food, raw food, lightly cooked food
Mhm.
is fine. It's just not this heavily processed kibble made of poor quality ingredients. And do
Mhm.
dogs survive on it? They do because they're scavenger carnivores. But do they thrive? And do
Right.
they, what we see is chronic disease, and chronic
Mhm.
disease is from chronic poor health
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
poor nutrition, excuse me.
Right.
Let me ask another question. This comes from Lisbeth. If I'm currently feeding a whole food diet, is it necessary to add more probiotics to my dog's bowl? That's a
Mhm.
great question. Let's hear your side of it, your
It
take
is.
on it.
I used to sell probiotics to just about anybody who would come into my practice. Last time I sold a probiotic just to somebody probably was about 2 years ago.
Wow.
And that was after I read a study that was done in the human field again, where they basically checked humans who had been on antibiotics. So they had three groups. One group was receiving probiotics afterwards. The second group received nothing. And then the third group received a fecal transplant. So guess whose microbiome recovered the least quickly? It was the people who were on the probiotics.
Wow.
And I think what happens is that when antibiotics are given, it reduces the number of microbes. So there's a little bit of space that's being created. And if you give probiotics to that, they will then fill that space. And probiotics generally are supposed to just be transient. So they go in, do their job, and go out. So they're not supposed to be resident because they're like resident microbes and they're transient microbes. And probiotics tend to be transient microbes. So basically they were taking up space because, well, now there was space there. And then as a result, the microbiome was not restoring itself as quickly. So I basically stopped doing that. Plus, there are also some animals, if you give a probiotic, if they already have an imbalance and you're feeding the wrong side of the imbalance, it'll just get worse. And that's why some dogs, for example, did do really well on fermented things, like fermented milk, fermented vegetables, fermented foods, while others get worse. And that's what happens. It just feeds the wrong side of the imbalance. So plus, again, probiotics have what, if you're lucky, 10 strains of microbes in it. So I'm not trying, I just prefer not wasting people's money on that. But feeding a little bit of soil-based probiotics here and there, or a little probiotic here and there once in a great while, you know, and varying the probiotics probably won't hurt. But feeding the same probiotic year in, year out, which usually oftentimes happens, you know, people get stuck to one thing and then they continue using it for the rest of the animal's life. Yeah. So I'm not a huge fan. And plus I prefer to figure out what the imbalance is and then restore that imbalance with a fecal transplant, because I'm putting in 500 to 1,000 different species of microbes, which obviously is a whole lot more. Plus with fecal transplants, there are also all the things that we don't see in the poop, you know, like nutrients, compounds that can help with inflammation, and all of those types of things also are in there. And so you basically get a lot more bang for your buck, basically.
Kimberly has a question, which kind of goes into that thought process. Kimberly asks, how long and how often do you give fecal capsules to a puppy? And is there a specific brand that you recommend? And maybe you could educate our listeners into what is fecal transplants.
So fecal transplants is basically where we take poop from a donor dog and put it into the recipient dog. And the donor dog obviously has to be healthy, minimally exposed to toxins, etc. I mean, so it has to be really good, have a good microbiome, don't have any of the pathogens, no parasites and such. And so basically fecal transplants can be done orally or rectally. So orally it would be capsules, and usually that's freeze-dried poop in a capsule basically. And then rectally, usually that's more of a slurry that we just put in through a little tube that's about the diameter of a thermometer. So it's very easy to do. They don't require sedation, contrary to some belief out there. And with capsules, it's like a repeated thing because, you know, we do it several days, you know, up to a month or longer, depending on the animal, obviously, and the condition. Whereas with a fecal transplant, it's, you know, we get it in and then we kind of wait and see what happens, basically. But we can also repeat it, you know. But in a puppy, it depends a little bit on what their condition is. If they have great poop, they haven't been on a bunch of antiparasitics and antibacterials, and we know a little bit more of maybe what mom's microbiome was, I may go with less capsules. Usually I start with maybe 2 capsules a week type of thing for like a month, or about a month. But if they have diarrhea, obviously I would increase that. And then also if they have to have if they had parasites and they had to be treated, a lot of puppies end up with giardia, and then they get treated with metronidazole, which basically eradicates everything. And so in those cases, I would obviously do more. So it very much depends on what's going on.
Sounds great.
She asked about brand.
Yes.
So Animal Biome, they have fecal capsules that are very easy to give. They also can send powder that then your vet can turn into a slurry and insert rectally. Animal Biome has capsules that are from raw-fed donor dogs and also from not raw-fed donor dogs. And the raw-fed donor dogs are Margot Roman's, Dr. Roman's dogs. So I usually recommend those over the other ones. And then Dr. Roman also sells, sends fresh poop that was, frozen, obviously. She sends that to veterinarians to do rectal transplants. And so she's definitely a good source of poop.
We have one last question. And it is, what probiotics would you recommend to give to a cat after 2 weeks course of antibiotics? Antibiotics were given for a UTI, and we don't have FMT here in Malaysia.
I would definitely check about FMT in Malaysia, because Animal Biome ships poop, fecal capsules all over the world. There are some countries that they can't ship it to. But if you were in Malaysia, I would contact Animal Biome and find out. And then probiotics, well, again, we don't really know what the imbalance is. So I don't have any particular probiotic to provide, but it seems like Saccharomyces boulardii, which is actually a yeast, can also help with the overgrowth of certain microbes of the Clostridium group. And so if I have to put a dog or a cat on antibiotics, I will provide them with some Saccharomyces boulardii while they're on antibiotics, just to kind of prevent that overgrowth. And then after that, I will usually do a fecal transplant. But if you're in Malaysia, you could also kind of check around in your neighborhood and with your friends, do they have a cat who's been super healthy for their entire life? And then they could send a fecal sample to Animal Biome as well, and have it checked out to see what that microbiome is like. And so you could basically that way find a donor in your area, and then your veterinarian could do a fecal transplant on your cat.
He also asked if is it okay to use that yeast long term?
I don't usually like to use things long term. I'm more of like let's treat and then stop, especially when it comes
and then go to a fecal transplant.
Yeah, because I don't know if Saccharomyces boulardii long term, I'd have to check in that if it starts to establish itself and create an overgrowth as well. So yeah, that would be kind of
sounds great. Well, thank you guys so much for these fabulous questions. And Odette, of course, you're like a wealth of treasure trove of information. It's fabulous. So I think we have, nope, that is it. Is there anything else you would like to cover?
I think I did see another question at some point. Well, I guess one other thing when it comes to microbes in the gut and overall would be to also take your animals outside, into different areas of your, not just walk around in circles in your neighborhood, but go to forest preserves, go hiking where nature is still more, natural and less disturbed.
Yes.
so that they can have a good microbiome and get microbes that way as well, because they also get microbes from the environment. Plus, decreasing levels of stress in general is important as well, because stress will also affect the microbiome, and the microbiome will also create more stress. So it's like a kind of two-way street. So making sure that you look at your own level of stress, your animal's level of stress, and one of the best ways to decrease stress is going out in nature and exercising. And they've also done some research on how exercise affects the microbiome, and it does certainly have a good effect on the microbiome as well. So yeah, exercising is one of the cheapest ways of creating health.
Very
So,
fabulous. Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for joining me,
yeah,
Dr.
thanks so much
Odette.
for having me.
Of course, it's a wonderful chat on GI health and how we can make our pets' microbiomes the best possible and really bring some solid science to this, which is really fabulous. I'd also like to thank all of our viewers and all the fabulous questions that were asked, and really kind of made this an informative and interesting talk. And thank you so much, Dr. Suter. I think you're just amazing.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions people may have too about,
How could they
things
reach?
like
How
that.
could people reach you?
I have a website. It's OdetteSuterDVM.com. So basically, if you read my name there, just remove the comma and the space .com. You can reach me that way. And then I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, those places. And I have a
And
lot of.
how could they find your book?
That's on Amazon, and the book's name is What Your Vet Never Told You, and then it has some other something supporting something something. I can't remember. But if you put in What Your Vet Never Told You, then yeah, you'll find it, or my name on Amazon for sure. Yeah,
Sounds great.
yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for all the pet parents out there spreading the word. You guys are the ones making the difference, and obviously you as well, Chris. Doing all these educational things. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Okay, Lisbeth.